Psalms Primer Lesson 4. So we're gonna go through the second and third section because they kind of run simultaneously. Oh, there he is. But we're going to be looking at the second section of Psalms, which is called what? You might know. Psalm 50. No, that's the core of that.
What'd you ask?
The second book. What's it called? What's it dealing with? There you go. All right.
You're the girl. That's why I was
Now, I told you the core Psalms in that section. What are they?
What?
I know.
40 to 48.
50 to 60.
50 to 60.
Close.
I believe you.
I didn't get it.
Because I said last week, if you could, just try to read those Psalms and look for the issue of deliverance being brought up in those Psalms. And we're going to look at them because they're all over the place in that section. And that means, or the constant theme of this second section is about deliverance, as far as like prayers in the section. Like we looked at it last week, we looked at the last chapter of the section, which is Psalm 72. And the last verse says, the prayers of David are ended. So that whole section is filled with prayers. And every prayer he prays in this section of Psalms is about deliverance from something. And it really actually starts all the way back in the first section where it transitions from redemption of sin to redemption from enemies. Right? That is, and what he's saying there is it's a reference to physical redemption because, like, remember the structure last week, the Psalms that come before the core Psalms build the case, then there's the core Psalms that deal with the actual mechanical means by which the issue at hand is going to be brought to pass, and then it transitions into the next section. So it's like a mountain going up, and then you're at the top, and you go back down and transition into another one. So like Psalms 22 to 24 was the core Psalms in the first section, right? And this is a chapter right after the core Psalm, and it says, "Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles." So the redemption of sin happened in Psalm 22, but now after them core Psalms, they're asking for redemption out of all his troubles, not just their sin. Well, that transitions into physical deliverance that we're going to be talking about today. So all the way back in the first section, the remnant is now calling for God to show more of his Jehovah-ness by redeeming them physically. And that's setting them up for the next section, which is deliverance. Now, David functions as a type of the remnant in this second section, and he functions as a type of the remnant that will be experiencing the need for deliverance out of the 70th week. And that's why David's experiences, David's prayers, and his cries unto God are recorded in detail in 1st and 2nd Samuel, when you read 1st and 2nd Samuel. And that's why these Psalms have very specific superscriptions, like when he fled from Saul in the cave and stuff like that. I mean, some of the remnant will be in caves, like David. Some will be persecuted by apostate Israel, like David. And some will be amongst the Gentiles being persecuted, like David was. And these things were recorded so that the remnant could have hope in God for deliverance in their time of trouble. That's why that stuff was recorded. I mean, imagine asking God to deliver you from something and you have no historical record of him ever doing it in the past. Well, how are you going to have hope in that? You know what I mean? There's a bunch of, the Bible's written like that and tells the same story over and over and over again. And the reason why it's written like that is because something's going to happen in the future, and those people need to have a hope and assurance of something, and they will because God's already recorded it in this book. But I mean, if you ask God to deliver you from something, I mean, I understand there's a faith aspect, but there's things that God just does, and then later on, He puts you in it puts someone else in the same situation. And it's up to them to have the assurance of, well, am I going to trust Him? Has He done it before? Well, yeah, He has. It's back here, so I'm in the same situation. I need to trust God for Him to do what He needs to do to get me out of this or do something for me. But in the 70th week, God acts as Israel's deliverer and avenger. And there's a fine line of distinction between the two sections. The distinction depends on the application of each mandate. So, example, when God drowned Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, He delivered Israel, right? But the way He did it is by avenging Pharaoh's army. So they can happen in the same event, just one happens to the one group and the other happens to the other. The same judgment or event can take place, but the aspects of that event can be distinct. So when we talk about the second and third section of Psalms, we will see lots of similarities of issues, appeals, and statements being made when we look through both sections. And that's because the way God physically delivers Israel from His enemies and His troubles is through His avengement. You can read that in Revelation. And this all lines up in Revelation. Now we're going to look at the first core psalm here. It's a psalm of Asaph. The mighty God, even the Lord, hath spoken, and called the earth from the rising of the sun and the going down thereof. Now, he says, he starts out this core psalm in this section, which this section of Psalms runs from 73 to 89. Nope, sorry, that's not right.
72.
No, 42 to 72. Yep. 42 to 72. And this is 50 to 60 is the core Psalms. So this is the first core Psalm. The first verse, it says, the mighty God. Now we looked at last week, the mighty God is in connection with God being the deliverer. That's one of His names in Isaiah chapter 9, which in context is Him being the deliverer for Israel. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Right? He starts off this core psalm, the mighty God. So the name of God in connection with Him and being the deliverer is the mighty God. And this is the beginning of the core psalms of the second section. It begins by calling God His title for being their deliverer. And then he says, even the Lord hath spoken. Well, hath spoken about what? Right? He's not just talking about and called the earth from the rising of the sun and the going down. He's not talking about creation here. He's talking about hath spoken in reference to Him being the deliverer, the mighty God. Look at what he says. Verse 2, out of Zion the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before Him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about Him. He's coming out of Zion, and He's coming as that right there, the mighty God. And He's coming as a conquering hero in the eyes of the remnant. Now, this is not a reference to the first coming of Jesus Christ. You say, why? Because God's already functioned as the Redeemer, historically. If we're looking on a historical timeline, even the way the books of Psalms are laid out, Redeemer's already been dealt with. We're in the deliverer aspect now. What happened at the first coming of Christ is He he functioned as the Redeemer, and He went back to heaven and sat down at the right hand of the Father, where He's at right now, and He's sitting there till His enemies be made His footstool. And when that time comes, He will stand and deliver His people as the mighty God. And He's coming out of Zion. There it is. Verse 4 to 6, He shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that He may judge His people. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens shall declare His righteousness, for God is judge Himself, Selah. What God is setting forth to the remnant is the fundamental issue of Him being their deliverer. So from verse 1 to verse 6, God's laying out a doctrinal foundation for His deliverance. He's going to come as their mighty God, like we saw right there. He's going to come in light and fire. Our God is shine, a fire shall devour before Him. And when He comes, He's going to vanquish their enemies. And we're going to read about that.
Can I ask something real quick, Corey?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
You probably already covered this too while I was gone, I guess, in the last section. But what you just was showing there out of verse 3 about out of Zion.
Yep.
Have you showed them Romans 11:26?
I'm getting into that.
Okay.
Yeah, at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Paul believes in all of the 5 Davidic mandates. Because 4 of them are there in Romans 11:26. Now, there's a reason why Redeemer's not there, which is why I'm going to get in. Yeah.
It changes from
Yep.
the actual quote.
Yep. So He comes as a mighty God. He comes in light and fire. And when He comes to vanquish their enemies. Now, in verse 7, once those first 6 verses are stated, God then begins with an appeal to the whole nation. O my people, and I will speak, O Israel. Not just to the remnant only. Because there's going to be a divide. There's going to be an apostate nation, and there's going to be the Lord's generation, as we saw last week out of Psalm 22. So here He's making an appeal to the whole nation in preparation of what He just said from verse 1 to verse 6. And from verse 7 to verse 15, God is trying to call this remnant out of Israel's religious system. They need to disassociate, like we saw last week, from apostate Israel if they want to experience the deliverance aspect of God. And the first experience that the remnant will experience, the first experience of deliverance is by separating themselves from apostate Israel. Now He makes the appeal here, I will speak, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. He says, I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. He said, why does He say that? Because for thousands of years, the sacrifice God was looking for didn't show up, and then it finally did. And it showed up on Calvary. And the remnant that trusted that sacrifice, God does not expect him to continue on in the temple offering sacrifices. And He said He's not even going to reprove them for it. You either accept the sacrifice or you don't. That's what Hebrews says. He talks about a certain fearful looking of fire, of judgment and fiery indignation being poured out upon the adversaries. There's no more reproof. It's either you either do despite to the Spirit of grace or you don't, and you suffer the consequences or not. See, apostate Israel will just continue to keep sacrificing, and God's not going to reprove them either. He's going to destroy them for doing that. I mean, He's done with this. Is the first issue in the book of Hebrews. This is why Hebrews starts out the way it does, because the book of Hebrews is in connection to the 5 Davidic mandates, starting off with talking about how Christ already functioned as a Redeemer. Now He's coming as a deliverer, an Avenger, and King, and Blesser. This is verse 14. The remnant who accepted the sacrifice, or those who have, He says, I don't need you to do these sacrifices or burnt offerings. I need you to offer thanksgiving. That's what is needed from the redeemed nation. That's the same concept taught in the book of Hebrews. And now we all starting to understand why Hebrews 5 says what it says at the end of the chapter. For the time when ye ought to be teachers. The concepts talking about in Hebrews is all the way back in Psalms. That's thousands of years, folks. And the concepts talked about in Hebrews are in line with the Davidic mandates. And Psalms, all Psalms is a doctrinal exposition on the 5 Davidic mandates. They're dealt with in Psalms. That's why Hebrews quotes Psalms a lot. That's why when Christ was on the earth, under the 4th installment, he quotes Isaiah and Psalms. Isaiah, Psalms, Isaiah, Psalms. That's because that section from Job to Malachi was supposed to be read under that 3rd installment, which is the 400 years of silence, preparing them for their 4th and 5th installment, where the Davidic mandates would come. The 4th installment would be the Redeemer, and the 5th, Deliverer, Avenger, King, and Blesser. So Christ quotes that stuff. So offer unto God thanksgiving, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. That's the last statement to the remnant part of the nation. When that remnant who offers unto God thanksgiving, when they call upon God, he's going to deliver them. But that remnant is defined as those who have forsaken the animal sacrifices and have offered the offerings of thanksgiving unto God. That's the Israel of God. When they call upon God, he's going to deliver them. Because of this, they're going to be persecuted. When they've separated themselves from the apostate nation, they're going to be persecuted and put to death like Christ said they would in his earthly ministry. And that's what God's going to deliver them from, is that persecution. Now notice he changes in verse 16. But unto the wicked God saith, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth, seeing thou hatest instruction, and castest my words behind thee? This goes back to the warning of Proverbs 1, which, if you know about Proverbs, that's the section from Job to Malachi. Proverbs is in that section of the poetic books that the remnant was supposed to read, or Israel was supposed to read and understand until the Messiah comes. That's why the first chapter of Proverbs, it talks about if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, come, let us wait privily for blood and stuff like that. I mean, that's not hard for me to do. You know, I don't go out here looking to kill anybody. That's talking about Jesus Christ. And don't be with those people who are going to put him to death, the innocent. Yep. Proverbs 1:7. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Thou hatest instruction. The wicked. Fools. Right there. Remember, Proverbs, and I went over this like the very first lesson, Proverbs is a book written to that remnant of Israel to disassociate themselves from the wisdom of this world. The wisdom of this world is that wisdom right there. They despise God's wisdom, and they despise God's instruction, the Lord. And Christ called these people a generation of vipers and fools and blind guides. That's what he called them. Look what he says in Psalm, when thou sawest a thief, then thou contendest with him, and hast been partaker with adulterers. Christ dealt with both of those issues on the Sermon on the Mount. When the thief, he said about thieves, give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn not thou away. That doesn't sound like someone who contends. That sounds like somebody, if you get stole from, you give them something else. But the wicked contended with them that stole. And hast been partaker with adulterers. What did he say? Whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery. They're partaker with adulterers. Notice, I mean, look, Matthew 5:42, verse 31 and 32. If you go back in Matthew, these verses are what's in context is what Christ said about personal righteousness. That's where it starts. That except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. It hath been said, by who? Scribes and Pharisees. They're the ones telling you, whosoever shall put away his wife, you got to make sure you got paperwork for it. Basically. So the wicked of Psalms 50 are defined as the generation of vipers in Matthew chapter 3 and the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 5. He says in verse 21, Psalm 50, these things hast thou done, and I kept silence. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such as one as thyself, but I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. He said, I kept silence. He did. That's what happened under the third installment. They were doing that before Christ even got there. That's why when he comes, he reproves them the whole time he's in his ministry. But he kept silence. But he says, but I will reprove thee. He did when he showed up under the fourth installment, which is Christ's earthly ministry. Now consider this, ye that forget God, lest I tear you in pieces and there be none to deliver. This is in line with the installments. Those that did not receive the reproof of Christ end up being torn into pieces. Those that received the reproof and offered unto God thanksgiving, when they call upon him in the day of trouble, he said, I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. But apostate Israel, who will not join this group, they forget God, and God tears them into pieces, and there be none to deliver. Whoso offereth praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God. Peter says the same thing in his epistle to the Lord's generation. In context of this verse, Peter says that his audience was a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation. And then he says this in verse 12, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, what they shall behold, they may glorify God in the day of visitation. And to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God. Peter says, by his audience's conversation among the Gentiles will behold it and begin to mimic what the Lord's generation is doing. That's what he just said. And what the Lord's generation will be doing right there is that.
Is that day of visitation there, Corin, the time of trouble?
It's either the time of trouble or the second coming. I'm not really sure yet. (51) Now, the Psalms that came before Psalm 50 set the stage for what was talked about in Psalm 50, which means they brought up the issue for the need of a deliverer. And then when you get to Psalm 50, you read about God's title when he functions as a deliverer, which is the mighty God. Historically, God already functioned as the Redeemer at Calvary. The next thing on his list is his function as the deliverer. And who God delivers is that remnant from the apostate nation and from the Gentiles. That's why all them superscriptions, like I said. So the core Psalms of the deliver section begin with what is said in Psalm 50, which he delivers the upright and tears in pieces the wicked. He delivers one, and there will be none to deliver the other. Now, Psalm 51 to 60 explain the various deliverances from the various troubles that the remnant is going to go through. This is the first one. Deliver me from blood guiltiness. They're getting specific. 52, Maschil Psalm. A psalm of David when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said unto him, David has come to the house of Ahimelech. A conspiracy was against David to kill him. And David wrote a psalm knowing that deliverance was coming, just like the promise of deliverance will be given to the remnant of the 70th week. Now, how should they respond when this is going on? Because this is this is the same kind of stuff the remnant's going to go through. So what mindset should they have? I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it, and I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints. They're waiting on his name. God made a promise of deliverance in connection with his name, Jehovah. His Jehovahness is being put on display. You'll notice that in the last verse of these chapters, the Psalms make an appeal for the deliverer to come and do his work. Like this one, Psalm 53, last verse. Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion. They're wanting it to come. When God bringeth back the captivity of his people, and Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. Paul references this concept in Romans 11, where he says, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Right? And the remnant in Psalm 53 are making an appeal for the deliverer to come ripping through the sky. Come out of Zion. Zion's above your head. And then Paul says, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer. Now, this is proof that Paul knew these 5 mandates were real and believed them. Because, anybody know where he's quoting from? This is what it says. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion. The Redeemer shall come to Zion. But when Paul quotes it, he says, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer. What does that mean? Well, God hadn't functioned as the Redeemer when Isaiah was written yet. But by the time Paul writes Romans, God had functioned as their Redeemer at Calvary. And matter of fact, actually all 4 of the remaining mandates are listed there in Romans 11:26. The deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob, that's the Avenger. For this is my covenant unto them, which is the Davidic covenant, which is when he sits on his throne, when I shall take away their sins, because he's going to bless them. That's the next 4. They're all there in Romans 11:26. For anybody who thinks I'm just making stuff up. Psalm 54. To the chief musician on Neganoth Maschil, a psalm of David, when the Ziphims came and said to Saul, doth not David hide himself with us? So we have more betrayers. Verse 7, for he hath delivered me out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon my enemies. The remnant's going to have the same experiences there. They're going to be betrayed and stuff like that, like David was. And then they have confidence that God's going to have deliver them out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies. I've noticed that the superscriptions of these Psalms, this section have Maschil in them. I kept saying that, Maschil. Like Psalm 52, Maschil, Psalm 53, Maschil, Psalm 54, Maschil. What does that mean? That means it's a doctrinally educating psalm. These psalms are written to doctrinally educate the remnant in the things that David already went through, because they're going to go through similar things. That's the reason why Maschil is there. Psalm 55:1, it starts out, Maschil. He says, as for me, I will call upon God. Remember, this section started out with, if you call upon me, I will deliver you. And David's writing out there, after that, telling them about his experiences and what he did and, for God to save him, and the Lord saved him from it. They're written for the remnant. He says, "As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me." There's going to be times where the remnant is alone by themselves, and there's going to be times when the remnant will be with others. And when that battle comes against them, all they have to do to get out of that thing is that right there. They don't have to do anything else. He gave them that promise at the beginning of the core Psalms in Psalm 50. We looked at it. He said, if you call upon me, I will deliver thee. That's what he said. Psalm 57. Big Tom, when he fled from Saul in the cave, I will cry unto God Most High, unto God that performeth all things for me. He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. Selah, God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. Now when he says, unto God that performeth all things for me, that is in reference to the promise of deliverance. He will perform all things as far as deliverance. And then he says, he shall send from heaven. You know, that's a reference to the angels sent forth to minister to them who should be heirs of salvation. The guardian angel concept in the Bible is real. It just has no application today. That stuff has application to the remnant. That's why Hebrews brings it up. Psalm 59. To the chief musician, I don't know how to say that. Miktam of David, when Saul sent and they watched the house to kill him. What is it?
That one looks German.
Deliver me from mine enemies, O my God. Defend me from them that rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity and save me from bloody men. Now the core issue in this second section of Psalms is about the deliverer and his deliverance. And we went from Psalm 51, he said, deliver me from blood guiltiness. And then basically finishing out this core section, he says, save me from bloody men. That's because the apostate nation is going to be persecuting that remnant. Psalm 60. This is interesting. He says, when he strove with Aram Naharim and with Aram Zobah, when Joab returned and smote of Edom in the valley of Salt 12,000. This whole psalm is about the Edomites. It says, give us help from trouble, for vain is the help of man. Through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. The Edomites make a league against, the Edomites make a league against the remnant of Israel to destroy them. And if you know anything about Edom, that's where God whets his sword when he comes to avenge. Now we read this psalm. Notice the attitude of the remnant now. It is in opposition to what their father's attitude was during the book of Judges. Right? They're not talking about Gideon to come save them, or they're not asking for Samson to come avenge them. They said, vain is the help of man. Give us, they're talking to God there. Give us help from trouble, and don't send us someone like us. Through you we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. That's the remnant's attitude now. They're asking God himself to come deliver them. Now, that's the end of the core psalm there. So Psalm 50 introduced the mechanical means by which God is going to function as the deliverer. And then you get to Psalm 68, and you'll have to read Psalm 68. But Psalm 68 comes full circle and amplifies what Psalm 50 was talking about. So you'll have to go read both Psalm 50 and Psalm 68 on your own. But Psalm 68, what it is doing is transitioning from God being the deliverer to being the avenger. So basically, it's transitioned from the promise of deliverance to how he's going to deliver the remnant, which is through avengement of their enemies. Now we're going to look at the third section. And the core psalm of that third section is Psalm 79. It's only one psalm. I think there's 13 chapters there. The name of this section is about God being the Avenger. This is verse 1. Psalm 79. O God, the heathen are coming to thine inheritance. Thy holy temple have they defiled. They have laid Jerusalem on heaps. Now when is that? I mean, it's like the halfway point of the tribulation period, right? Well, 70th week. That's right. I mean, and this is what they're telling God what happened. Now listen, that they're not asking deliver us. They're getting specific about what type of deliverance they want. Pour out thy wrath upon the heathen that have not known thee, and upon the kingdoms that have not called upon thy name. If you call upon my name, I'll deliver you. And they're asking them to pour out his wrath upon them who didn't call upon his name. It's getting specific. They're making an appeal to God to deliver by avengement, and that avengement is his wrath. Same chapter. Let the sighing of the prisoner come before thee, according to the greatness of thy power, preserve thou those that are appointed to die. That's the satanic policy of evil there. And the remnant's asking for God to preserve those that are appointed to die. And render unto our neighbors sevenfold into their bosom their reproach, wherewith they have reproached thee, O Lord. Why does it say that about the bosom? You know what they're asking for? They're asking for the second coming of Christ. Jesus Christ said there should be signs in the sun and in the moon and the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them. Bosom's part of your chest. Why are they failing them? Number one, for fear. And for two, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. They're asking for the second coming of Christ. Now, men's hearts will fail them because of God's avengement and how he's going to bring that about. And just as the deliverance aspect replied to the remnant of Israel, the avengement has an application to a certain group of people. That certain group of people is introduced to you in the core psalm of that section, which is this right here. It's them right there. Not the Gentiles, the heathen. You say, what's the difference? Well, this is a particular group of heathen nations that Satan is going to use to bring about his plan of evil against Israel. Now, this is not the core psalm, but this is where you read about it because it's in this section. You read about these heathen nations, Psalm 83. And this is what they do. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel be no more in remembrance, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The confederacy against Israel is to wipe them out, cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel be no more in remembrance. Who are these nations? Edom, number one. That's why God whets his sword in Idumea. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites 2, Moab 3, the Hagarenes 4, Gebal 5, Ammon 6, 7 Amalek, 8 the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre, number 9, there's that Assyrian. Asher also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah. 10 of them. Given right there in Psalm 83. Where do you read about 10 nations at? Or 10 kings? "10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." What's their one mind? That's it. And now, this is the remnant's cry in Psalm 83 against these heathen nations. "Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, at the brook of Kison, which perished in the word, they became as dung for the earth." They're asking specific avengement. And the remnant is hoping in God's avengement because of something that happened in the past. All that stuff happened in the book of Judges there. All that history that's written in your Bible was mainly for the remnant of Israel to have hope and assurance in God during their day of trouble. That's what that stuff's written back there. And they're quoting it there in Psalm 83. Look what he says. They keep going. "O my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before thee, before the wind, as the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm." Well, he's not being figurative when he talks about thy tempest and thy storm. They're asking him to give his tempest. Well, God in Psalm 50, in the second section, said that his deliverance, when he talks about being the mighty God, he says, "The fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous." So the way he's going to deliver, it's going to be very tempestuous. Now notice that Asher, let's see. See that? Mentioned at the end of the list. You know the book of, when he talks about thy tempest and thy storm, you can read about that storm in Nahum chapter 1. And God describes what his tempest and his storm is going to look like against Asher in Nahum chapter 1, because I know it says the burden of Nineveh, but Nineveh's in Assyria. That's a whole book dedicated to that. And this explains why God does what he does in Revelations when the heavens open up and great hail comes down. I mean, God said he reserved that stuff for the day of battle in Job. That's his storm coming out of the sky there. Verse 16, the remnant keeps going. "Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the Most High over all the earth." That's the purpose for God's avengement right there. His name is at stake if he doesn't do those 5 mandates. He's doing that. The 5 mandates are because of God's name's sake. It's not about anything about David or Solomon or any of his children. It's about the one that showed up 2,000 years ago. His name is at stake. And he made a bunch of promises by that name. And he, by his name, Jehovah, alone, has to fulfill those promises. And the Gentiles who seek his name after that avengement have a call to submission to the king. You read that in Psalm chapter 2. And if they submit, they will be redeemed and will have benefits of the king and his kingdom and the blessed and his blessings. You can read that in Zechariah 14. Now that's the end of the second and third section. So next lesson they'll run side by side as well. You have Psalm 90 to 106 is the king section. And the core Psalms in that runs from 95 to 100. And then you have 107 till the end of the book is about the blesser and his blessings. And these core Psalms there are 120 to 134, which are the songs of degrees. Now, if you have time this week, I'd read them. Read that core Psalms there, and read the core Psalms there, because that's where we're going to be. We're going to be focusing on the core Psalms, where it's the issue, the main issue at hand in each section is being presented and put on display. All right. Does anybody have any questions?